Welcome to Biztecha's Technology Show. Today we focus on trends that will shape the landscape for e-commerce in the coming year. Now, to give us insights on this topic, our guest for today is Kailash Madan. He's the head of APAC for Primer. Primer claims to be the world's first automation platform for payments and commerce, now offering merchants the underlying infrastructure they need to build better buying experiences for their customers. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Kailash.
Thank you, Brian, so much for having me on this show. Super excited to speak to the audience and convey what we think would be key trends for 2023, especially as tech becomes an extremely important player of all decision-making process for merchants in Asia and globally.
Now,
thank you.
For an overview, could you give us a snapshot of Primer and its history and what it does?
Yeah, so Primer has been around for about 3 years. We launched just before COVID in the UK. Essentially, what we saw working with a number of merchants globally is payments is quite complicated. And as you become a global organization and expand into multiple markets, the complexity only increases. Now, add to that different stages of buying experiences for a customer on a merchant website. I think the complexity just exponentially increases. And in a market like Asia, which is extremely fragmented, this is even more pronounced. So what Primer does, as you rightly said, is we're the world's first commerce and payments automation platform. And essentially what we offer is a unified technology infrastructure so that merchants can offer the best possible buying experiences for their customers. Just to double click on this and to share what this means in reality is merchants may consume multiple services to have the best payments experience. They may have objectives around driving operational efficiencies, right? Like how do you ensure that fraud is maintained properly? How do you ensure that you have shipping providers integrated on your platform? How do you deal with loyalty? So what Primer gives is a unified infrastructure to tie all of these services together in a simple, agnostic manner, which would normally take months to do from a technology perspective, but we can do it within hours and days. And that's where speed to market becomes extremely important.
Okay, so that is essentially your value proposition and compared to your competitors. The fact that you can you have already stitched all of this together compared to, say, a traditional payments vendor where you would have to then add on different elements and then combine them together.
Correct. At the core of what we do is a framework which is open and agnostic, right? Now, on this framework, we are able to connect to pretty much any service. It could be a payment-related service, like what you said. It could be a non-payment-related service, which is critical for a merchant in their commerce flow, right? So we can connect to each one of these services, and a merchant just needs to have one connection to Primer, and they can leverage all of these services which they use as part of their operational stack.
Okay, now I want to just dial back a little bit and focus on Primer itself, because you really walk the talk. What's super interesting about Primer is you talk about starting from the UK 3 years ago and being a global company. You're a fully remote company. Tell us about that and how that works from an operational standpoint.
Absolutely. I think from the get-go, we've been fully sure that we want to be remote first. And what that gives us is the ability to hire globally. So we have employees, about 120 of us working from 30 different countries. And essentially what we want to do is ensure we serve the merchants we work with in Europe, in Asia, and in North America in the time zone that they are based in, right? Of course, for a startup to scale in a matter of 3 years at this level becomes extremely hard if you were to develop office space and real estate across different parts of the globe. But being remote has really ensured that we are able to be where our merchants are. And that essentially is what drives us even from a product perspective, right? Like we listen to our merchants and build the right product. So I think being remote has really helped in ensuring that we help our merchants in the time zone they are based in.
Okay, now Kailash, I want to ask you in terms of you talked about literally having an end-to-end solutions on a click of a button and quick implementation in hours as opposed to months. Give us a perspective in terms of some customer stories that you've enabled across the world that that you're very proud of as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. But before I talk into an actual customer use case, I can just help the audience visualize what I just spoke about, right? Like, let's look at a merchant who sells to a diverse customer base in Asia, right? This could include Southeast Asia. This could include markets like Japan, Korea, and then Australia, New Zealand, right? So this merchant would effectively need to have a place where they actually accept payments from all of these customers in the markets I just spoke about. And accepting payments is not as straightforward as just accepting card payments, right? Customers in Indonesia would want to pay using a wallet or a bank transfer mode of payment. Customers in Japan may want to go to a supermarket and make a payment there using Kombini. In Australia, they may want to do Pay2 or Pay ID, right? So the types of payment methods are extremely complicated as you try to reach a large number of markets, right? So that's one. How do I ensure as a merchant that I have all the relevant payment methods that my customer wants to see? Now, once the payment is completed, how do I ensure that I reward my most loyal customers with voucher codes or give them some sort of incentive to come back and shop on my platform? How do I ensure that my shipping happens on the right time? And from a logistics perspective, the customers receive their product in the right shape and form at the right point in time. Once that is done, how do I ensure that I communicate seamlessly via email, sending them the receipt? This may have tax implication if you're a business buying stuff online. So it's not just about how do I accept payments from my customer, but it is about that unbelievable customer journey from the time they click on that pay button till the time they receive the product, right? So that's what we are trying to solve for. Now, a live use case is a merchant called Zenium, a case study we recently released. So Zenium is a very innovative dental company creating aligners for customers, and they're quite popular in the Asia Pacific region. Through Primer, what they were able to do is launch in about 9 markets from the 3 they were working in a matter of 6 months, right? Typically, for a merchant to do this, it takes years or a number of years to do this, right? But because they were enabled to launch, because we enabled them to launch a number of services which they could use across these markets they wanted to launch in, I think just accelerated their speed to market. And that, if you were to ask me to sum up what we help merchants do, is what I would say. It's accelerating go-to-market and revenue recognition for a lot of these merchants who have regional/global ambitions.
Now, Kailash, one of the key things that you stressed several times already during the conversation that we've had is the word complexity in terms of managing payments. Now, even more so, I think, in the Asia Pacific region, because many countries have been largely cash-based and are now moving towards more non-cash-based payments. So, there's waves of innovation going around in the Asia Pacific region. 60% of the world's population is here, and non-cash payment transactions are growing at 30% a year. In your opinion, what are some of the key developments and innovations that we can expect in this region in 2023?
Yeah, very good point. And some of the stats you shared, I think, extremely interesting, right? Like, we have 60% of the world's population, but we also have the largest proportion of the underbanked population in the world, right? Now, what that means is access to traditional payment methods, what you'd see traditional in the Western world, which could be credit cards, is not that common because you have a large population of unbanked people. So instead, what we are seeing as replacement for cash is the proliferation of wallets, the proliferation of online banking, payments via supermarkets. So these kind of payments, which are still digital, but these are alternatives which we are seeing very specific to the Asia Pacific market. There was a recent Google-led study which says the digital payment market is expected to hit about $2 trillion in transaction value by 2030. So this is not a small number by any stretch of imagination, right? I think for 2023 specifically, we don't see this trend bucking down. Agreed that what we see post-pandemic from a digital transaction perspective does not have the same level of growth rate as we saw during the pandemic, but that does not mean that cash has bounced back to the rates we saw earlier. Cash is definitely seeing a decline, and that is being reversed by the adoption of other payment options, which could be alternate payment methods, as we call them in the Asia Pacific market. And I think that ties back to what you said, right? Like Asia is complex. And it is complex because of how fragmented it is from a payments perspective. Each country has 5 to 6 different payment methods, which are popular amongst their customer base. And for a merchant to be successful in this market, they need to offer all of these to address a larger target market.
Now, Kailash, Primer has identified 5 key trends that are set to shape the landscape for e-commerce in the coming year. Now, could you walk us through each of these trends? And let's start with the first one, fly now, pay later. Tell us more about this. Is it an extension of buy now, pay later? How did this trend come about?
Yeah, this is extremely interesting, right? Buy now, pay later, of course, we're all quite familiar. But what we're seeing right now is fly now, pay later, which pretty much takes the same fundamental principles of buy now, pay later. It is essentially, how do I, as a traveler, buy my plane ticket, but then pay it as a buy now, pay later transaction, which means in 3 or 4 different installments. I think that the fundamental driver for this is the way international travel is bouncing back post the pandemic. I think a recent report from the World Tourism and Travel Council has shown that the contribution of Asia to the GDP will be 32% more in 2025 as compared to what it was before the pandemic, right? I recently saw a report saying Changi is back to about 75% of pre-pandemic levels from a travel perspective. Now, all of this is great, but on the other side, we also see inflation is at an all-time high. Interest rates are at an all-time high, which means disposable income is quite hard to come by. So, which is where fly now, pay later has kind of taken center stage, right? People want to travel, but maybe the macroeconomic situation does not enable me to pay off this huge bill at one shot, right? So, I think what we're seeing is combination of these 2 factors, which lead to this trend. It's I think Amadeus said that about 46% of Singaporean customers are prioritizing international travel over other large ticket spends. Right now, if
that's a huge number, 46%, it's almost half the population.
I know, and out of this 46%, 95% of them are saying they are open to trying stuff like fly now, pay later. Right, which is quite interesting to see, which basically makes even a large ticket travel purchase more affordable, and that kind of ties into the type of merchants we are speaking with as well, because travel and ticketing is a big vertical that we are targeting at Primo, and a lot of these merchants want to adapt and offer buy now, pay later as a payment method on their checkout page because customers want to pay using that payment option.
Now, Kailash, the thing that you've alluded to, and you talked about this again, inflation, global economic slowdown, that's going to have a significant impact on businesses in 2023, which brings us to the second trend that you identified, digitize to optimize. Now, tell us more about this and what your findings are with regard to digitize to optimize.
Yeah, in my view, I think this is going to be the most significant driver of business decisions going into 2023. The reason I say this, as you said, with the rising inflation and the general sentiment across companies right now is to focus on profitability and sustainable growth. And it's not growth at all costs anymore. That growth at all costs is something we saw when there was access to cheap capital, but going into 23, I think it's sustainable growth and focus on profitability. Now, how do you do this, right? You need to have a strong tech layer because that's the most efficient way you are able to optimize for human capital. The second is how you able to drive revenue from these technical infrastructure purchases that you make as a company, right? So that's where I think selecting the right tools becomes extremely important, because you want to drive operational efficiencies by cutting costs, getting your internal systems to talk to one another, and driving more important business related decision making. And two, you want to also increase your addressable market by being relevant in the areas you play in, right? And how do you offer the best experiences to customers? So I think overarching, you want to digitize to optimize to, one, keep your costs low, and two, reach a larger audience and increase your TAM so that you can drive revenues. The third thing in this theme, which a lot of people don't tend to talk about, is also on the risk side, right? Like, how do you ensure that you keep your risks and fraud at a minimum, because that is a business expense that you would definitely want to avoid. So I think all of these three themes under digitize to optimize is kind of answered by a unifying technical infrastructure, right? And what we see from a report from Gartner is tech spending, in fact, is going to grow at about 6% in 2023. So no one's stopping buying their technology infrastructure. It is just how they want to do it and how the evaluation is going to happen. So you will see a lot more finance folks sitting in on this decision-making process, because apart from product related capabilities, you also need to demonstrate value in terms of how much additional revenue can I bring in, how much cost can I save, and how much risk can I help you mitigate if I make the spend. Does that make
The
sense?
next trend, out of your five, the third trend is e-commerce. Now, e-commerce has grown tremendously over the last 3 years. Obviously, the pandemic put e-commerce growth on steroids. What are your expectations on the space, and where are we seeing growth in this sector in the coming year?
Yeah, I think e-commerce is here to stay. The growth is definitely happening. It was accelerated tremendously, as you said, during COVID. The growth will be there, but not at those levels. But the growth will definitely happen. And the reason I'm saying that is the demographics of Southeast Asia, right? I think we have about 60% of the world's population, but we also have a large portion of this population which has mobile penetration, right? And what this means is they are very discerning in the type of payment methods that they want to pay using, right? And they want to do or they want to conduct a lot of these payments digitally rather than in store. In fact, digital wallets in the region are expected to see over 250 new users, 250 million new users by 2025. So all of this just points to the fact that more and more people are spending time on their mobile phones, and as a result, they are purchasing more online, right? So people spending time online just means you need to have the right experiences to capture this market. And I think e-commerce is definitely an area which is here to stay. And as a merchant, if I want to tap that market, I think I need to ensure that my customers, one, feel comfortable paying on that particular website, and two, they have the relevant payment methods that they want to pay using. For instance, in Singapore, we see about 80% of consumers and businesses have adopted to Pay Now, which is now a very popular payment method here. And that pretty much accelerated during the pandemic because it is lower cost, it is faster, because customers want to pay using this payment option.
So you've talked about e-commerce as the third trend. You've touched now on e-wallets, the fourth key trend, and mobile payment acceleration. Let's talk about the fifth trend now, which is something that is not in the radar of a lot of people, but has just accelerated in terms of awareness, in terms of attacks over the last 3 years. Cybersecurity. Cybersecurity a threat have gone up exponentially during the pandemic. Also, organized crime has become more and more involved in cybersecurity. Walk us through your thoughts on cybersecurity as the fifth trend that we need to be watching out for.
Yeah, I think as you said, right, this is often ignored because it's not a direct contributor to revenue. But cybersecurity is extremely important as a business operating in the Asia Pacific market. Just because you have so many consumers transacting online, I think if you want to engage them, it is almost your responsibility to ensure that you provide a safe platform for them. So I think having the right systems and tools in place to ensure that one, the website is built in the right manner and you accept payment details of your customers in the most secure environment. I think that is extremely critical. So that's more on the broader cybersecurity theme, but more specifically, I think as a merchant doing business in the Asia Pacific market, you would also want to counter for fraudulent transactions, right? We see a lot more of that happening, especially as more people tend to shop online, be it physical or digital goods. I think working with the right fraud providers who have the necessary levels of checks to screen legitimate versus illegitimate transactions and being able to proactively block it, I think makes a lot of business sense for a merchant, because that's a lot of human and actual capital spent to fight these kind of dispute charges with the acquirers and with the issuing banks. So what you would want to do is be proactive around this space and ensure you work with partners who have the intelligence, who have the AI and ML capability to screen transactions the way you want, depending on what appetite you want. I think there is also a level of balance that you need to maintain as a business. You don't want to block everything, because ultimately the goal of the business is to generate revenue. So, which is why working with the right tools, I think, gives you that mix. How do I ensure that revenue is not compromised, but also fraud is kept at a minimum so that business can go on and just continue doing my operations?
Kailash, and I just want to add one thing in terms of cybersecurity. You gave a very interesting stat that Gartner predicted that despite the downturn, 6% increase in IT spend. The reality is also, and this is through our conversations with CEOs across the region, the key message that is coming out with is that there's going to be increased investment in anything that's in cybersecurity and increased protection and keeping the lights on, perhaps not on the nice to haves that perhaps they've been spending on. Lots of companies have been spending on new tech, new hardware over the last 2 or 3 years. But really 2023, as you alluded to, is just around making sure that the business keeps safely transacting.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think essential services will definitely grow, and what people may think of a few services as discretionary may become essential in 2023, and that's where real business value becomes critical, right? Like if you find services that can actually have business impact, then those might become essential for you as you try and optimize for your operational efficiencies. What we are seeing talking to a lot of merchants and decision makers across businesses in Asia is also the need for redundancies, right? Redundancy in terms of my tech stack. How can I just work with one provider, and what happens if that goes down? Maybe I need to have a backup option in place so that business continuity, as you rightly mentioned, is not hampered, right? So how do I ensure that I build my internal systems for a bull run, which may happen, say, end of 2023, once we enter into a more low inflation, high growth kind of market, right? So this is a good time for companies to invest in the underlying tech so that they are prepared, one, for a bull run, and they also have the necessary infrastructure to counter any downtime, any kind of redundancy strategy which they may have as a business.
Now, Kailash, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've really learned a lot and keeping a lot in mind for 2023. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think two themes, right? One is most of the folks at Primer come from payment background, and what we have seen talking to hundreds of or even thousands of merchants globally is that payments is complicated and payments is complex. And if you are able to solve that in the right manner, I think it unlocks a lot of value for merchants and helps them scale regionally/globally. But the most important takeaway I'd leave the audience with is, I think 2023 is a year where the number of decision makers on any tech related spend has to be higher. This could involve folks from product, it could involve folks from tech, it could involve folks from finance. But essentially, what they will be looking at is how much revenue can it generate for my business, the delta, how much operational efficiency can it drive, and how much of risk can it help me manage? And I think any technical infrastructure that comes into the market and is able to stay the course will address these three main points. And that's pretty much what we are striving towards at Primo as well, like drive actual business revenue and business implications for our merchants while giving them a first-class technical infrastructure product.
Now, Kailash, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Kailash Madan, the head of APAC for Prima, on BizTech's Technology Show. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.